Good afternoon, everybody. It's our great pleasure to welcome Commissioner-General of UNRWA, Philippe Lazzarini, to the SDG Media Zone. And we have a discussion coming up about the important events in Gaza and the Middle East. Commissioner, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
So you've been at UN headquarters for several days now of high-level diplomacy. How do you translate that to the people on the ground, the people of Gaza? What is your message to them? Is there a message of hope?
Well, as you know, the people in Gaza are going through an unprecedented humanitarian crisis. Basically, it's a crisis of all the possible superlative, all the extreme. People are confronted on a daily basis with death, hunger, disease. They have been pinballed over the last 10 months. They keep moving. They have no safe space where to go. They are living in appalling, unsanitary condition. And my role is to make sure that the plight of the Palestinian and Palestinian refugees in Gaza is not forgotten, because easily, when we are in lasting conflict, there is a risk of a growing fatigue. And more than ever, the people in Gaza need the attention of the international community, and they need also the services of an agency like UNRWA, which has been and continue to be their lifeline.
Is there any light at the end of this tunnel? Are you coming away with any sense this week that the conversations that are allegedly happening around possible truces in the region, including in Lebanon, can actually get somewhere?
Well, there have to be light at the end of the tunnel. The only thing is how long is this, how further longer is this tunnel? We don't see any exit anytime soon, unfortunately, for the time being, which means much more misery for the people there. I try also, beyond the life-saving situation in which people in Gaza are confronted with, I'm also drawing the attention of the member states and the international community about the risk of sacrificing an entire generation. We have 1 million children below the age of 18. Among them, more than 600,000 are on the age of primary and secondary school. They are living in the rubble. They are deeply traumatized. And the longer we wait to bring them back into a learning environment, the more we will take the risk of sowing the seeds of hatred, resentment, and extremism.
It's so hard to think about the future when we're stuck in this present of war and endless suffering. But let's talk a little more about the future. I mean, where do you begin? What are the main priorities? You have to literally rebuild, but you have to rebuild the lives of, as you say, young generations who are utterly traumatized. Is that something that UNRWA would play a role in potentially going forward?
Well, first of all, the future is in a political solution. We know what the political solution is all about. It's a two-state solution, and is also to meet the aspiration of the Palestinian for self-determination. So when we talk about Gaza, it has to start with a ceasefire. It has to start with the release of the hostages and the scaling up of humanitarian assistance. But in parallel, we need this political solution. Now, the role of UNRWA has been an agency providing public-like services to one of the most destitute communities in the region, being the Palestinian refugees. We are providing education at scale. More than 500,000 girls and boys are in our school. So in any transition post-ceasefire, the agency is the only one place to bring kids into a learning environment in the absence of a functioning administration, in the absence of a functioning state.
I want to talk a little on that point about the importance of the media and eyewitness journalism being on the ground. It's obviously been very difficult for many media organizations to be in Gaza. There are some heroic Palestinian journalists still going about their trade every day. There are some news organizations, there are UN teams on the ground, and UNRWA staff and other members of the UN have been a really critical link between what's happening on the ground and communications to the outside world. I just wonder whether, with the spread of violence towards Lebanon and the fact that media will be much more present there, is there a risk that the world will forget about Gaza? It's already a struggle to get it on TV screens, but is there a risk now that important people will turn away from the suffering of Gaza?
First of all, it's extraordinary that no international journalists have been able to go to Gaza for 1 year, and that we completely relied on local journalists. And as you said, they have been extraordinarily heroic. They have paid a very high price. More than 100 have been also killed since the beginning of the war. Now, like in this kind of context, there is also a war of narrative, a propaganda war, a disinformation a campaign going on, and this is the reason why I think we should continue to insist for the presence of international journalists, and the less they will go, the more we will, of course, take the risk that Gaza slowly but surely become, I wouldn't say a forgotten, but less covered type of conflict. Now, Lebanon is the latest spillover in the region. No one knows exactly where this will go. Are we still in an escalating trend? Yes, it seems to be the case. Will we be able to de-escalate? I really hope so. But the situation in Lebanon is very much connected to the situation in Gaza and in the rest of the region. So I do not believe that Lebanon will completely overshadow the situation in Gaza. But I want to flag one thing, is the West Bank. The situation in the West Bank is worrisome. There is a kind of silent war taking place. The number of people who have been killed is the highest since the second Intifada. Operation taking place in various villages or refugee camps, most of the time inflict also collective punishment to the population. And it is true that this situation is overshadowed also because of the spotlight we had in Gaza.
Could you tell us a little about UNRWA's presence in Lebanon? You know, UNRWA doesn't just operate in Gaza, it operates across the Middle East supporting Palestinians. Tell us a little about your operations in Lebanon, if you may.
You're right. I mean, UNRWA is present in Lebanon, in Syria, in Jordan, in the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and in Gaza. Basically, we provide education, primary health services, social services to the Palestinian refugees living in the camp. In Lebanon, we have about 220,000 Palestinian refugees living in the camp. We are running schools there. We are providing also primary health. And as you know, the Palestinian refugees in Lebanon have very little access to job opportunities, so they do rely enormously on UNRWA. Now, with the war, this community is also, like any other inhabitant, impacted by the latest event.
Tell us about your finances. Obviously, this has been in the news over the past year when donors turned away, donor countries turned away, but things have turned for the better in recent months, right?
Yes, the agency is in a financial crisis now for many, many years. One of the reasons is related to the fact that before October 7, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict was not a priority anymore for the international community, and hence the funding of the agency became a kind of a proxy of this deprioritization. We should also never forget, we are an agency providing public-like services, but we do not have the fiscal tool of a government or an administration, and we completely depend on voluntary contribution. We have 30,000 staff in the region, civil servant-like staff. Now, you referred to the crisis this year when the 16 donors temporarily have frozen their contribution to the agency, which has accelerated, deepened the financial crisis of the agency at the peak of the humanitarian crisis. Fortunately, because of the measure being taken by the agency and the way we have dealt with severe allegation, most of the donors have come back, and today the shortfall to end the year is about 60 to 80 million dollar. We are covered till the end of October, but I'm confident we will have this afternoon a donor conference that we should be able to bridge the financial situation between now and the end of the year. 25, it's a different forecast which will impact all the development and humanitarian organizations, since we know that number of donors will enter into an austerity phase as from 2025.
I just wanted to flag a story that was written at the UN about this topic, about how private donations were reaching tens of millions. And there was one beautiful anecdote of an elderly woman in Singapore who took several buses and trains and came with a bag of coins and put something like $46 on the desk and said, send it to UNRWA, which sort of warmed our hearts in terms of the realization in the general public about the important work you do. So, Commissioner General, thank you so much for your time. We much appreciate your thoughts.
Thank you.